Page of the New York Times is not the venue for discussing classified information. The White House podium is not the venue for discussing classified information. We are here today having this discussion because of an irresponsible, anonymous leak to the New York Times. There is no good scenario as a result of this New York Times report. This level of controversy and discord plays directly into the hands of Russia and unfortunately serves their interests.
I wanted to loop back on you saying that the president never been briefed. There's, I think, some dispute over whether in February his PDB included this intelligence information, so I'm wondering if you can say whether or not, he may not have read the briefing book that he was presented with, but was he at some point at least given access to this information?
So the PDB is a top secret document that is widely disseminated among government. I will never sit here and confirm or deny what is in a top secret document, so I'll leave it at that. One thing I will say that is routine is when there is intelligence. I was speaking with some folks over in NSC about this earlier and some other folks around the White House. When we get intelligence, verified or unverified, deemed credible or not credible, deemed consensus or no consensus, if that information in any way impinges upon the safety of our troops, that information goes to our troops on the ground and to our allies so they can take the appropriate measures. What is briefed up to the president in this case was not the case, was never briefed to the president of the United States because there was no consensus. What is briefed to the president is when there's a strategic decision to be made. So in this case, if there was a strategic decision to be made vis-a-vis Russia, those are the kind of things that are briefed to the president when they're deemed credible. But in this case, it was not briefed to the president. There's no consensus. It was not credible. But make no mistake, this president will always protect American troops.
Sorry, just to follow on that, I think there's 2 points. One, I would say that press secretaries in the past have disclosed in certain instances what was in the PDB. But secondly, this is a relevant issue because I think critics have already seized on this and said, well, if the president isn't reading his PDB, he might not know that there are these policy decisions to be made, right? If a president was presented with this information, it's unverified, he could be alarmed, change his posture towards Russia, conceivably ask intelligence officials to work harder to determine whether or not this was true, make a series of judgments. And so I guess more broadly, I would re-ask the question of whether it was in his material, but ask you maybe to defend why the president isn't necessarily reading his PDB when there are these types of issues that could arise.
The president does read, and he also consumes intelligence verbally. This president, I'll tell you, is the most informed person on planet Earth when it comes to the threats that we face. You have Ambassador O'Brien, who sees him in person twice a day, who sometimes takes the upwards of half a dozen calls with this president. He's constantly being informed and briefed on intelligence matters, but I'm not going to allow the New York Times to dictate when we give top secret information and don't give top secret information. That's an untenable proposition.
Let me just say, nothing quite hammers home the White House talking point that Joe Biden is old and confused, like Kayleigh McEnany having to stand up at the lectern and insist that her guy knows how to read and is totally, definitely informed. There's a campaign slogan, Trump 2020, we swear he can read. This is Kayleigh McEnany still running cover for Trump amid the newest development in Trump's Russia bounty scandal, wherein Russia was paying bounties to Taliban militants to kill American soldiers while Trump was briefed and did nothing. Now, while the White House is still out here pretending this whole thing doesn't even exist, new reporting shows that not only did it happen, but that Trump received a written briefing in February detailing the operation. And so the question in front of us now becomes whether Trump didn't bother to read his daily brief or read it and didn't bother to do anything. And either way, it reflects really poorly on the president. Because A, if he didn't bother to read it, then he's not doing his job. It's a dereliction of duty that has directly led to the killings of American soldiers overseas. I'm old enough to remember when 4 Americans were killed in Benghazi and Republicans wanted Hillary Clinton tried for treason because of it. And yet when a Republican president doesn't bother to read his daily briefs, which lead to the continued killings of American soldiers, well, suddenly it's crickets from the party of the military. All of those Benghazi defenders have suddenly gone quiet. Funny how that works out. And B, if he did read his brief and still didn't bother to do anything, then he willingly and knowingly allowed Americans to die because he's more deferential to Vladimir Putin than our own troops. By the way, according to the New York Times, quote, officials developed a menu of potential options, starting with making a diplomatic complaint to Moscow and a demand that it stop, along with an escalating series of sanctions and other possible responses, but the White House has yet to authorize any step. He hasn't authorized any step. He didn't even pick the most basic option, which is to just ask Putin to, oh, I don't know, not place bounties on our soldiers' heads? I mean, this guy is so beholden to Vladimir Putin, he'd rather allow a scheme wherein contracts are placed on our troops' scalps than dare to confront him. And Trump's whole shtick is that he's supposed to be a tough guy. I guess he's only able to find his voice when it's immigrant children he's attacking. Some strongman, huh? But in either scenario, whether Trump didn't bother to read his PDB or he read it and ignored it, Kayleigh's desperate defenses truly aren't doing him any favors. Standing up at the lectern and swearing that Trump reads and that he's the most informed person on the face of the earth isn't having exactly the effect that she thinks it's having. And in fact, when the White House issues these absurd superlatives, these claims that are so blatantly meant to stroke Trump's ego and not reflect reality, it only proves how full of it they are. This is like when Sean Spicer claimed that Trump had the biggest inauguration crowd in history, period. Or when Scaramucci said that Trump could throw a perfect spiral through a tire. Or when Trump's quote-unquote doctor claimed that he could live until he's 200. Not only are they lies, but it lets us know that this White House doesn't care about the truth and that they're willing to discard it in an instant if it means they can stroke their boss's ego. And it tells us that if they're willing to lie about something so insignificant as his ability to read, then imagine what else they'd lie about when more serious matters are at stake. So when you're deciding who to vote for in November, I'd suggest that maybe you think twice before marking a ballot for the guy whose selling point is that he can read. I think that maybe, just maybe, we should aim a little bit higher than that. If you like that video, please check out my brand new podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I'll cover the most important political stories of the week and interview major players in the world of politics. Available now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check it out and subscribe now.